Imagine, if you will, for a moment that you are asked to give a keynote. You are asked to present in front of 200 people about a topic that you know a little bit about. And then on top of it, you're asked to do it virtually. Something new, something different. Well, this actually happened to me in October of 2020 during the pandemic. And I found myself going through all those things that new speakers go through, which is, why did they ask me? What am I going to say? How am I going to do this, particularly with that element of technology? How will I connect with my audience? Well, I'm excited to share with you some insights that both Michelle and me have come to grow and learn when it comes to crafting a keynote with confidence. I'm Tina B., founder and chief communicator of Tina B. LLC, a public speaking and storytelling coaching company. I protect audiences from boring speeches. And I'm excited to have you here today because I feel that all of us have something we're sharing, that we need to find our voices and find the power within to share what we know to audiences, to connect with them. And I'd like for Michelle to introduce herself. I'm excited that she and I connected a few months back. She's a client of mine and we worked together to help her craft her own keynote.
Yeah, I found Tina through the local Chamber of Commerce where I live. Because we both live fairly close together. I had been thinking about doing a keynote and had for a couple of years, and I couldn't get out of the weeds. I was really stuck in the weeds. What I do is food labeling and regulatory, and I live very deep in food labeling and regulatory. I like all those nitty gritty, tiny little details that nobody else wants to think about. And so I was really stuck. I couldn't figure out how to get out of the weeds. And back in 2017, somebody had suggested coaching to me that there were people out there who, like Tina, who actually would help you craft a keynote. And so when I found her, it felt like the right time and the right moment. And so Tina helped me, and I have crafted actually 3 keynotes now.
I'm so proud of you, Michelle. That's awesome. And together we worked on that first foundational keynote to where she could get out of the weeds and branch into additional keynotes, because that's the goal, right? Is get that first keynote out and then you start birthing other keynotes that come with it. So our goal today is to help all of you who are here in this webinar to have the confidence and the clarity to know, how do I exactly create a signature talk, something that I know about, that I care about, that I'm passionate about, that I can share with other people. And we're going to do that today with the following points. First, we're going to focus in on how to create clear content. Second, we're going to discuss how to make your delivery memorable, because those 2 ideas are key in order to have a really strong signature talk. Let's start with creating clear content. Now, I live in Southwest Iowa. I know we have participants from different parts of the United States here today, but in Southwest Iowa, in the summertime, it's really hot and humid, and it basically requires air conditioning. Similar to the need for air conditioning in Southwest Iowa, you as public speakers, the very first thing you need to do when you're in the process of wanting to create clear content is you need to analyze your audience. You need to target your talk, because it's all about them. I like to say, if you give a speech and no one is listening, did it ever really happen? And that's where it comes into play of asking yourself, to whom am I speaking? Is it a group of young professionals who are trying to create a startup company? That's a very different group than nonprofit executive directors who've been in the business for 10 to 15 years. Based on knowing that audience, that will affect and influence not only the message, but then how you deliver it. So Michelle, I'd like for you to share just a little bit of what we talked about before you even started crafting your talk, in terms of the different audiences you were considering for this very first keynote.
Yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about my audience and who I was going to target. And my plan was to target food trade shows who would have people who worked in the food industry mostly sales and marketing people, not necessarily those techie folks like me. So I needed to bring this up to a level that would be interesting and find a way to make this interesting for those people who have some experience in food and they know what a food label is. But if you get too deep, their eyes glaze over and they just really want you to go away. Because I get a lot of that in my real world.
Right. And I think what was important is you asked yourself, what are the things that those people care about in the audience? What are some of the characteristics? And that all influences your content. So what were some things with this given audience that that they would need to know or care about knowing?
So we looked at talking to them about, what are the nutrients of concern and what should they be thinking about? And we settled on a few main topics around nutrition points, nutrients of concern.
Absolutely. And so thinking about what they know, because that's at the core that you need to ask yourself are questions like, what is it that they already know? What is it that they need to know? What is it that they, what can I share with them to help make them feel better, to give that good feeling and have that healthy, happy balance of reporting information that shows your credibility, as well as having experience through story where it gets at that pathos or the heartfelt connection so that they remember the information. And when you think about then the audience, so you've kind of honed in on that specific audience that it's people that have a care for food. They're not researchers and scientists like yourself, but that's a different level. So using jargon and other word choices that would be important to define or soften within this keynote. And when we think of keynote, that is an important thing to even just address. First of all, is after you've thought about your audience and you do that analysis, you have to address what exactly is a keynote presentation. Well, it's really an important high-level talk that is based for a specific event. Generally, you see these at conferences, summits, where you are getting the undivided attention of a larger group of people, where there's generally a theme. For example, I just attended the Rural Development Summit in Cedar Rapids last week, and having a focus of telling the story for rural Iowa towns was the focus of the particular presentation that I gave on during that summit. But being aware of why people are coming, what are they looking for, and that your keynote is sort of the for the whole different event is important. Now, from there, after you compose the audience analysis, Michelle, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about content and building that content, and what were some considerations? What did we discuss specifically with starting in the middle? That's what I really focus in on when I work with clients, is start in the middle. You as the speaker, it's on you to select and arrange the information in a way that makes sense to you and that you impart it to your audience so that they can understand you. So talk with us. What did you decide when you came up with your 3 to 4 main points?
So yeah, I was struggling with what my bullet points, I call them my bullet points, but my main points were going to be. And on a whim, I went to the grocery store and I was wandering up and down the aisles looking for inspiration on food labels, because there's no place with more food labels than a grocery store. And all of a sudden it came to me that I needed to talk about these nutrients. So we settled on fat, sodium, protein, and sugar as our main points. And we picked each of these nutrients that come out of that nutrition facts panel on the back of your food, of every food label.
Well, what I like that you did is you were stuck for just a moment of, okay, I want to talk about something. I'm going to go around where I get inspiration. And in your case, walk around without expectations, just walk around and observe and tune into what I see with labels in the grocery store, and you sort of got that epiphany. Now, for those of you that don't talk about food like Michelle does or research it, find that way of getting unstuck. For me, I walk on the farm and I take a little notebook, or maybe it's watching a video, a TED Talk that's sort of around the similar topic that you're talking about, to just get you inspired, or reading something, or having conversation with a mentor or a person that you find interesting to sort of give you the ideas. Now, when it comes to organizing your main points, Michelle decided to do 4 topics. So topical organization is a very common way in which to organize the main points within a presentation. You'll find when I do workshops, I focus on temperament and understanding yourself. So I would start with, first, you need to know yourself, then know your communication style, and then know your team. Note that those are 3 very different topics that I would hit on, share research and stories and examples, but they're 3 very different topics. Hers were 4 different types of food or elements within food, like fat, sugar, protein, etc. She also, let's say if you wanted to do a completely different topic, maybe you're talking about evolution of technology in agriculture, which is something that my husband as a farmer is pretty interested in. You might start with what has happened in the past with technology, where are we right now, and what is the future? So that would be a chronological means of organizing your information, very different than topical. Again, these are ways in which to organize and select and arrange that information to where it makes sense. You have to ask yourself, am I primarily sharing information, which is informing, or persuading, which is trying to induce action? I think that all communication is persuasive to some point because you have to get the audience to choose to listen to you. In a keynote, a lot of times you're really trying to inspire and motivate with that information. And that's where you want to bring in story, you want to bring in an experience, you want to bring in also some reporting information and balance that out. You know, TED Talks, about 60% of what they share are in story. So 40% data. So if you look at that balance, by and large, when you're sitting, if you found yourself sitting, listening to a keynote, you want to be entertained, you want to be engaged. And so it's on you, the speaker, to choose to do that. And what I have found by and large is that if you do 3 main points, which 3 is sort of the magic number, when you do a keynote, generally you don't want to do much more than 3 to 5 main points, again, depending on the time. Keynotes range from anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. So you want to bear in mind and ask the organizer, how much time do I have? Because that affects how much you talk. What's really interesting is all the clients and people I've worked with is whether it's with storytelling or presenting a speech or a keynote or TEDx, they think that, oh man, I've been told to talk an hour. I can't talk an hour. Or I'm told to do a 15-minute story. I can't do that. That's too long. You would be surprised. The shorter you're asked to speak, the harder the presentation. You have to really whittle it down to what's essential. So I'm giving a keynote for all the Iowa high school speech coaches for the state of Iowa coming up here in October. And they said, you have 10 minutes. 10 minutes to motivate, 10 minutes to inspire. And I'm thinking, woo, that's going to be a good challenge, a fun challenge I embrace. So first of all, ask yourself, when it comes to that magic middle of your content, what is the core way in which I'm going to select those main ideas, arrange them in a way that makes sense, and transition with thoughtful ways so that my audience can follow where I'm going. It's on you as the speaker to keep the audience in the know. If they're confused where you're going or your points are not coherent, then they're going to be challenged with following you, and then they'll stop listening and they'll not be engaged.
All right, Tina,
now, are there any questions when it comes to the content?
We do have a question, Tina.
Great.
Any advice if your topic is very subjective? For instance, the keynote address I was asked to give is resilience.
Great. Resilience. So that's a very abstract concept. And I would say, first of all, start deeply with, how would you define resilience? What is resilience to you? And then, you know, I always recommend clients to have storytelling journals or folders so that they can or a filing system where they collect stories. So if you can come up with some stories of when you were resilient, start there. I think in story, that's where I go to first. And then go to maybe other examples of resilience. I can't help but think of the past 2021 Olympics, where you have these athletes, and recently the gymnast, you know, that decided she did a couple of of events, but then stepped back for her own mental health, that is resilience, and that's being true to herself. So you can give stories of yourself, which I highly recommend you at least have a couple nuggets about you personally. People want to know the speaker, and that will make you likable. And then it's building from there and maybe having other example stories of resilience beyond yourself. So start there, defining what it is, coming up with stories to show versus tell. And then you're going to start to extract some themes. What are themes? What are you thinking of, you wanting to, it's very subjective in that, are you trying to motivate them to be a resilient audience? Are you trying to share tips for what that looks like? Are you sharing, it depends also too on what this audience, like who is the audience, and that would make a big difference as to what are they coming for. Are they coming for mental health care specialists, and how do they cope through a pandemic and work through it and still be the best healthcare professional they can be? That's a very different keynote about resilience than if it's a group of athletes and working through a mindset of challenge. So it's first, get that target audience down, define what resilience is to you, craft some, find some stories that are personal to you as well as externally outside of you, and then find those themes that come. And I would start just Googling or YouTubing resilience and TED Talks, because there's amazing amounts out there, and just do a cursory glance of what's already out there, and you'll probably get some inspiration. Does that answer your question in terms of moving forward with that particular keynote?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. That was a great question.
I have another question.
Sure.
How do you organize your bullets? I tend to write my whole speech on note cards. Great.
There is the difference between preparation outline and a presentation outline. Now, right now, I will hold up in front of you. I tend to type out, just the first thing I do is I type out all the things that I want to do, and then I kind of play with, that's my preparation outline. I'm trying to get all the things out, but then I can't read verbatim, nor do I want to, nor does my audience want to listen to me give a manuscript style workshop. So what I do is do more of an outline format that works for me, where I say intro, okay, story, and put bullet and say what in a line what the story is, and then break down my main points very briefly. So when you are presenting, some keynote speakers do a manuscript style because it works for them. And what they can do, I recommend, if you do manuscript style, make the font really, really big, triple space in between, and practice it so it doesn't come across as you're reading it. But if you do use note cards, because every speaker has a ritual, everybody has a different style that works for them, is make sure that it is written in a font and in a color that is easy to read, so that you're not fumbling through. I would recommend, especially if you have a lectern, that note cards are really small. You might consider just a sheet of paper with, the different bullet points, the different ideas that you have. Now, if there's specific quotes that you want to make sure that you say and get them correct, or statistics, then you want to put that like in all bold, all caps, so you can really, it pops from the page and that you can see it. So again, it's asking yourself, what works best for you? What works for one speaker doesn't necessarily work for the other. But what I have found for me is that I work through the entire presentation, and then I actually read my preparation outline out loud, play with the organization a little bit, flush it out, and then go back and make it into a presentation outline where I actually use this sheet, do a brief little outline. I even sometimes write little highlights, highlight some things I want to say with a marker, so I see it and it pops from the page, or write in pen or pencil. Don't forget to say this, because it'll pop from the typewriting. Hopefully that helps. Again, it's play with some things and do what you're going to do in your practice, because whatever you do, if you're stumbling through a sentence, or the content transition is not making sense, or it doesn't work, that's what's going to happen on stage, but in a hyperbole. It's going to be bigger, it's going to be harder, it's going to be worse. I was working with a client yesterday on his elevator speech for his nonprofit, and he wanted it to be 30 seconds, and he had this one sentence that was clunky. And I said, nope, let's rewrite that sentence. It's not working, because you're clunking through it every single time you get to it. You trip yourself up. you're not getting it, let's fix it. So that's where the practice comes into play with your content, is really practicing it out loud, not just looking at your notes, but reading them aloud so you can catch those moments that trip you up. Any other questions about the middle portion before we move on to the beginning and the end? Well, let's dive in. And we started with the middle. And again, I can talk on, and really it's the individual speaker. When I work individually or in groups with clients, this is what I do. I analyze and get this person speaking, and I help you craft that content so that it's meaningful, thoughtful, and it's point by point, so that it's coherent and parallel in structure, and you transition and provide those good details. What I loved is with Michelle's work, she would define what the term was, like what exactly is protein, give some examples and story, and then really give a great tagline for how we can remember that particular food item. So moving to that next piece that really is what people sometimes just dive in and start with is the hook. You have to start off with a meaningful way to hook your audience so that they want to choose to listen. And you can do this in a wide range of ways. You can start with a story, a startling statistic, a rhetorical question. There's so many ways, a cool quote. Michelle, why don't you talk with this group? What was your process with constructing a hook?
The hook, the introduction, was the hardest part for me. So let me just say that was by far the toughest thing for me. I tried to start with a story, and I told Tina 2 or 3 stories that were really clunky and didn't work. And finally, I was actually sitting in my office, and a friend emailed me a food label and said, hey, you got to look at this. And I was like, that's it. That's my introduction. That's my hook. So I went and found another food label that would work and made up a story to talk about, like, here's this food label and here's what's wrong with it. And she was outraged by what they were doing. And I'm like, yeah, but it's all legal. I mean, which is a truthful situation. Is what is on the front of the package of a food label is not always truly indicative of what you will find inside. So, it took me a while, and I think Tina and I probably went through 4 drafts of introductions before we finally got to one that kind of worked for us and that didn't seem clunky and hooked our audience in to make them want to listen to those 4 points I had picked.
Right. And the key is piquing the curiosity of your audience. What I liked is that you had that eureka moment where you weren't even looking for it and it just happened organically, but it's the antithesis was the hook. So when you are able to surprise your audience, they're going to be delighted. They're going to be, oh, and then want to know more. And that's where the beauty of, again, when you choose a hook, 2 rules of thumb I have for this. 1, it definitely needs to connect to your topic. You don't want to just tell a funny joke that you think is funny. By and large, starting just with a joke can fall flat. It can set the expectations high if it is super funny, but if your speech is more serious, you want to match the tone. But in addition to having the hook connect to your content, you also want it to align with your speaker style. So make it meaningful and connect to you so that it is natural. If you are saying a statistic or a data point that is really important, but it's hard to say, you may not want to open up with that. You want to massage the ears of your audience. You want to have them delightfully enter into the world of your keynote. And by throwing hardcore data that's really hard to understand right away is maybe not the best strategy. So again, have it connect to your content and have it align with your speaker style. Now from there, in addition to the hook, you have to end the thing. And just like the hook is a great moment in time to grab the audience's attention and have them choose to listen, the ending is very valuable. And a lot of speakers fail to note that they just end with any questions or just trail off. This is a moment where you can be very poignant. You can have a really strong means of challenging the audience, creating a beautiful utopian vision with what is perfect world. There's a lot of beautiful strategies to end your talk. Michelle, would you share, how did you decide to end your keynote?
Yeah, I decided to end my keynote by challenging my audience to do things differently. When you go to the grocery store, I challenge you to become a traffic hazard and stop and pick up labels and turn them around and look at the back panel. and make decisions based on that information, not what is on the front. And so I ended with a challenge to my audience to take up arms and actually do things differently. Now, whether they will or not, I don't know, but maybe they will. Maybe one or two of them will once or twice.
They absolutely will, Michelle. You've inspired my son, my husband, and me. We are constantly reading the labels. We're always saying, what would Michelle say? What would she do? And what I love is you've returned back to the grocery store and that space to end your talk, because that to me is that common ground. If you can find common ground with your audience, all of us have to eat. And all of us walk into a grocery store at some point to get food to eat. And so if you can get that common ground and then on top of it, layer with it a call to action to say, hey, we need to know better, do better, like Maya Angelou says, and this is how we can do it. You will inspire the audience. You will help them think differently and potentially do differently. Now, before we move on to our second point, which is focusing on making your keynote memorable, are there any questions regarding how to end or how to start your keynote or content in general?
Not a question, but a comment. I love that you guys are talking about ending it with an action. And what Michelle did is it was a small action. That does not seem intimidating to go to the grocery store and say, hey, just look at the labels. It seems empowering with just one small thing.
Absolutely. Thanks for that comment, Elvira. And right. That's another thing too, is that your call to action doesn't have to be like hiking Mount Kilimanjaro, right? It can be something small. And in fact, that's empowering your audience to do. Any other last comments or thoughts or questions before we move on? Well, in addition to creating clear content, we also make stylistic choices as speakers to be memorable. And this involves not only your delivery with your voice and your body, but also with what you choose to use for visual aids, if you choose to use visual aids. So I'm going to lay out for you some things to think about, some strategies when it comes to your voice, your body, and visual aids. What would you say, first of all, Michelle, when it comes to your voice, what were some things that you noticed that we talked about to help up level your vocal delivery?
I use the catchphrase, you guys all the time. And Tina was like, stop. And I didn't know I was doing it. So it was really great that she was there to say to me, hey. And it's funny because I've seen other people do it. My aerobics instructor always does, let's go. She does it over and over, probably 3 or 5 times a class. So, watch for those things that you don't know you're doing until somebody tells you you're doing it.
Absolutely. And those are called vocalized pauses or verbal fillers. It could be, you know what I mean? I had one client say that frequently, or or like, or whatever those are. Those clutter the communication. It's essential to work through that. And what I talked about with that phrase, you guys, is it can marginalize the women of the group. And so referencing your audience is powerful, but you don't want to say you guys. Instead, you might say as marketing strategists for food labels, or as consumers, or as grocery getters, whatever that may be. Labeling your audience is fine as long as it's inclusive and using inclusive communication. And obviously, when you go to the bulk of most conventions, most summits, it's a diverse group of men, women, transgender, all kinds, and we need to be inclusive with how we communicate with them. Additionally, when you think of voice, it's also how do you project? What kind of pacing do you use? What sort of pitch and pause? And we work through all of that. What I love about Michelle's voice is that she has a strong, powerful voice. And we talked about the importance of varying your pace, varying the tone in terms of vocal dynamics, how loud you speak, which that's natural for her and for me, to how soft you speak, and the power of a pause. So using that makes the beauty of a keynote even more of a melody to the ears of your audience, because oral communication is meant to be heard, not read in a manuscript. And when I read transcriptions of speeches, it's not the same. I much prefer listening. I mean, imagine reading I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King Jr., it's a lot more powerful to hear his really strong, powerful enthusiasm come through with his voice. And that's what you want to do with your keynote, is the power of your voice. Any other thoughts with that, Michelle, that you would like to contribute about the vocal delivery that we talked about and addressed with your keynote?
No, I don't have anything else.
Anybody have questions or thoughts about vocal delivery when it comes to making your keynote memorable? Well, in addition to vocal delivery, we also have physical delivery. And this is especially important. It's the choices that you make with your body from head to toe. Gesticulations, which are the tip of your fingers to the elbow, your facial expressions, as well as the posture, movement. If you step forward or to the side, those are called oration steps. How do you show up and how do you use the space? Now, there's been a wide range of ways in which I've given presentations, all the way from a huge auditorium with hundreds of people to in a library with multiple families sitting on the floor, to a gymnasium with students sitting, to a smaller professional workshop space for professionals, to virtually, right? So there's wide ranges of types of contexts and spaces that you have to analyze and how you show up. Now, when it comes to the bigger space, the bigger the audience, the louder you need to be, the bigger the gestures, the more you need to connect to the audience, because it's more people. I often say with those big auditoriums is divide it into 3 sections so that you can have that engagement and pick a few people in each of those sections that you really give eye contact to, that you really are speaking to, because A, that makes them feel part of the conversation because it is a conversation. But B, it also is lessening your nerves, right? It's connecting you with them. So it's a sending and receiving a message making so that it's really powerful, and it softens the butterflies that maybe you're feeling by engagement in an authentic way. From that, if you are, I used to favor my left side, I'm right-handed, so it seems very quirky that that's just a quirk I had. So I would sometimes overcompensate, sort of like years ago when I was playing basketball the whole summer, I worked on my left-handed layups so I could be great at it. Note what you do with your body, and when you have workshops and you're presenting, to the group, that you are engaging all of them. So if you have a smaller keynote and a more intimate keynote, bear that in mind, and always accept a microphone. Amplification is key because you want your voice to be heard. Now, if you have a lectern, both Michelle and I have ideas about this. Talk with us, if you will, about some of the physical delivery aspects we discussed. Michelle, maybe using a lectern or not to use a lectern. What are your thoughts?
Okay, I have a question in the queue too, Tina. So
okay.
All right, so I am not a lectern person. I find that when I listen to people behind lecterns, I sort of just zone out because they're standing there and they're very still. So I'm a mover. I mean, you guys can even tell from this. I'm a big gesturer. I like to move. So I have to move with purpose. That was one of the things that Tina and I talked about. And one of the things I really liked was movement as part of my transitions. When I moved from one topic to the next, I would move where I was standing as well. And so that made a big impact and helped my audience know that we were transitioning.
Absolutely. Your body can help regulate where the passage of the content is going. It additionally helps the audience, keeps them in the know. And it makes it stylistically beautiful to watch. It's a visual piece. And from that, when you're doing virtual, it's really important to note the space and understand that if you're speaking to hundreds of people, that they see your hands and your gestures, because that makes them feel more connected to you and more trusting you more. So there's a question I hear in the queue. What is that question, Michelle?
Do you have different advice for live presentations versus online presentations regarding vocal delivery and physical presence?
Absolutely. First is be authentic to yourself. Second is I had to go through a lot of mindset work when I was doing virtual delivery because it was completely new to me. And it's really wanky and weird to right now. I would love to have you in my space with me, but I have a panoramic view of my farm and the goats. And that is weird that it's that, not you. And so I had to work through, this is for my audience, and do a lot of work with how can I show engagement and enthusiasm. So to me, that was the first thing I had to get out of my head about it and focus in on engagement. And so when you're doing virtual, standing makes the presentation better. Make sure you have a good camera angle, good sound, good lighting. I have a ring light, and that you really practice with your PowerPoint, and that you gesture and you look at the camera, and that you still use your voice in powerful ways with pause, with bringing it down. Now with your body, it's the same way. I can't do a lot of movement. If I go, step forward for oration steps, it gets a little weird when I get too close to the camera. So you're limited with virtual in that regard. When it comes to in person, you have the stage. And I always recommend a lapel mic if you can, and get away from the lectern. Like Michelle said, I'm similar to her. I think it's a barrier for me. So a lot of it is tune into yourself, what you're comfortable with, and perform as you. It's like my piano teacher, Thelma Justice, said when I was 8 years old, and I'll never forget it, after a piano practice. She looked at me and she says, don't be flat, as in the note B. Don't be sharp, just be natural. And that's what your audience will feel, and that's what they'll appreciate and want more of. And there's a lot more I could go on that, but we're getting towards where I want to make sure we hit on visual aids and kind of wrap up with some questions. So the last of the stylistic choices, in addition to vocal delivery and physical delivery, I want to hit on visual aids. And this was something that Michelle and I worked rigorously on, and I would love for her to talk through how she worked on visual aids for the greatest impact. Because again, you need to ask yourself, does my keynote require visual aids? That's the first question. Maybe it doesn't, because I've seen some amazing keynotes and TED Talks that have used no visual aids. That's just fine if it doesn't require it. But there's a variety of ways that you can engage your audible learners with story, your kinesthetic learners with getting them to move a little bit. But it's also great, those visual learners, having a few slides is helpful if they enhance the talk and support what you're saying. So talk with us through this first initial visual aid that you had for your presentation for your keynote.
So I'm a scientist. I like lots of data, and I put lots of data on slides. So that was one of the things that Tina was like, no, this is too much. This is too busy. You're going to lose all your audience. They're going to be reading your slide and not talking to you. So we started with this presentation, or with this slide, and it took us a couple iterations to actually get to something that both Tina and I were comfortable with. You want to click that again, Tina? Oh, so we did a middle iteration, and then we did this final iteration where we actually showed the piece of pizza with the data. I think if you click one more time, of what the sodium reduces to and what percentage that is on a specific piece of pizza, so that you can see, it's this much. And this was the 2-year goal. And then we had the 10-year goal, which was even more.
Right. And what I loved about this, when we talked about it, she actually did a practice run for my family. And what was helpful is we said, you know what, when you say amount out loud, it doesn't stick with us. But if you show 10 tablespoons of sugar, or in this case, the slice of pie of how much really of pizza we should be eating and what the amount of sodium is, that's a lot more powerful. Because I don't know about you, but I eat more than that amount of piece of pizza in a setting. But it's good awareness of saying, oh, that's the amount that we're trying to work towards for our health. Is that visual enhances the content of her message. It's not upstaging her, it's supporting her. And too many times what I've found, like that first slide that we showed you, is that would be upstaging the speaker. Too much text, too many busy parts, just too much. You need to make sure that what you have is on there is essential. Less text is more. We prefer visual. In fact, with TED Talks, if you see them, and even keynotes, the most powerful slides are pictures or a word or a phrase, not tons of clunky information. Additionally, This was a graph that she came up with. And what I like about this is the difference in color and its simplicity, where it's saying sodium per day, the amount, and where we are in 2015, 2020, the daily value, and looking at that amount. Simplicity always wins. So I want you to end with, if you would, talking about somehow the Raisin brand Heart Healthy is not showing up on this slide. And so what I see in front of me, and it's not, the next animation is not going to pop up here. It's just in my notes.
Well, what I do when I use lots of food labels when I do presentations, because they're very real. Everybody has these things in their kitchen and they do it. But what we find here is that you can't read it, and people want to be able to read or care about what you say. So I'll often make a slide to support it, which has a picture of the label that's much larger. And then on this one, I took the little heart that you can not really see at all and blew it up with the text, which I don't know why it's not working, but it isn't. So
Technology, isn't that fun? You roll
isn't
with
it great?
And I love that
we
you
actually have the text that's in this heart so that you can read it on the screen if you really care as I talk about it.
Absolutely. And what I love that Michelle did in that moment with a visual aid, she improvised. She popped up a box of cereal. And that's something as a speaker, if you can get out of your head about it, we all have expectations. We want to make that engagement. We want to look smart and look good and do good, all those things. But if you soften and give yourself grace and say, you know what, I'll just pivot and do this other thing. People are very forgiving. Your audience is very forgiving. They accept and understand technological glitches actually happen. And from that, it's really using different means of communication. And in this case, props can be very powerful. Even the whiteboard behind me, if I wanted to draw something to connect with my audience, like a grid or just a word and point to it, that can be powerful as well. Today, we focused in on 2 primary points. And these points to highlight, to craft that keynote so that you do it with confidence and clarity is, first, you need to create great content. And from that, we looked at specifically the introduction, the body, and the conclusion, and gave some strategies for that. Secondly, it's how do you make your delivery memorable? And you do that through vocal and physical delivery, as well as visual aids, and how you use them so that they complement you and they complement the communication that you're having with the audience. I can't help but think as we move forward with each speech, with each communication, it's really analyzing with authenticity. Whatever kind of speaker that you are, it's being able to tap into that and let the heart guide you, making those choices with content, those choices with delivery that align with your speaker style, that are meaningful and comfortable for you. It's also practicing it, getting out and actually practicing it. I love that Michelle has crafted not 1, not 2, but 3 keynotes. And so now is the time for her to get out there and practice in front of friends, in front of family, so that she gets that comfort level and she's ready to share that information. When I work with Michelle, I love how she said she found me. And that just warms my heart, is that she was in the weeds. She wanted to do a thing, had a goal, but it took the coaching, it took the collaboration to get stuck and to help move forward, because I wasn't married to the content. I haven't been doing the work that she has done for multiple decades. And that's what I want you to think about, is if you have a keynote inside of you, and all of you do, is ask yourself, how can I get started with that powerful talk and connect with my audience and communicate for results? With that, I would like to offer, we're going to open up for some more questions because we do have about 10 to 12 minutes. I do want to share with you, I have an upcoming exciting group coaching program that I'm starting at the end of September. So I'm going to limit it to 12 individuals. So it's going to be an amped up Toastmasters experience. I don't know if any of you have done Toastmasters. It's an awesome group experience where if you've done Toastmasters, there's a support system there where you meet weekly, you give speeches. That's fantastic. The difference with that program and my program is I've been teaching this for over 20 years and I'm passionate about it. And so this will be a 3-month signature program where it will be me helping you and the group being a great accountability partner and support. And so if you're interested in hearing more about that and signing up for it, if you do so this week, I can give you a great discount, but that will be starting September. It's the 27th. So it'll start September 27th and go through mid-December. And I'm excited about this program. It's been something I've been working on and teaching people. I also have individual coaching programs, a 3-month signature program where you say, hey, I need to make a keynote. I don't know how to do it. And that's your goal. You get done with not only a keynote, but you have a mindset, you learn to get out of your conditioned self into your authentic speaker style. You learn more about your temperament. I'm certified in that to help you understand who you are affects how you work, communicate, and lead. So individual and team coaching programs. So with that, don't hesitate to shoot me an email, tinaB@tinabakehouse.com. Check out my website. I have also a newsletter there. I know that Michelle, she also has an email, is willing to answer questions too. But what questions do you have for Michelle or for me at this time in terms of keynote content and delivery? We're happy to answer.
I have one in the chat here for you. If you don't use the lecture, where do you put your notes on the stage when you're on the stage?
Well, I would say that you would, what I have done in the past, I either have put them on the lectern because I practiced the speech so much, it's just in my soul and in my body, and I just trust myself and go, and it's sitting there just as like my crutch and my supporter, and I never really look at it, but I put it on there. And I know other speakers that do that too. Or you can request like a table with a glass of water next to it so that it's there on like a clipboard so it doesn't fly off. I've done that as well, and other people too. So again, practice it a lot, but also practice placing it in a space that works for you, whether it's actually on the lectern and you just do movement that is natural, that you can go glance at that, idea, those notes, or on a table with a glass of water with your note next to it. Again, additionally, you may not need those notes if you've got multiple slides and that the slides in some ways guide, but I highly recommend getting away from doing a full-blown PowerPoint presentation with tons of text and tons of information, and that poses as your speaker notes, because guess what? It will disengage your audience. You want to surprise and entice them and intrigue them. And so you speaking without a slide and a blank screen is a nice break. And then you pop up an occasional graph or an occasional picture. Just recently, I posted on Tina B LLC as well as my LinkedIn account, if you want to check it out. I worked with a client who did a TEDx talk in TEDx Des Moines about farming. And what I loved about this particular TED Talk is the variety of visual aids that he used. He used a few, but the few that he used were powerful. He had a picture of him with his cows. He had a really great quote. He also had a graph, pictures of his farm, of a quick video of his farm. So he used just enough peppered in with the information. So again, it's being natural to you, but practicing that so that it doesn't come off uncomfortable in the moment. And so that's where you go to the space an hour at minimum ahead of time, walk it, feel it, touch it, practice it with the sound system, with your notes, so that you are comfortable, competent, and you're ready to walk on stage for that presentation. Other questions? I'm curious also, how many of you have a keynote kind of in the back of your mind that you're like, I could maybe do a keynote? A few of you? Any? I see some big smiles. I see it. But here's what I want to encourage you, is that every presentation that you do, you can do it as if it's a keynote, whether it's being a layperson in church, whether it is doing a workshop, whether it's a coaching session, put in that heart into it, that preparation into it, and have that authenticity and that relatability with the person, and you will immediately, or people with larger groups, it will come through. So if you can find those different actual content messages that that you care about, and then read about it, talk about it. The more you talk about it in organic conversation, even portions of your speech, the easier it will come off to others.
Okay, Tina, I have another question. How do you get
Sure.
past losing your train of thought?
How do you get past losing your train of thought? Well, I think the biggest thing that you can do, because this happens to all of us, I've had webinars where a glitch in the system, or a visual that, like today, a visual didn't pop up. I just take a moment and a breath, and I almost reboot my system. Everything is energy, and our bodies and our minds are energy. So what I recommend is, in that moment, you pause, because pauses are powerful. You take a breath, not like a, really loud breath, but just a small breath, and reboot. Soften the mind, soften the expectation of having to be perfect or doing well, or judgment, all those things that flood through our minds that we start to get mad at ourselves. Stop it. Just pause it. And then trust yourself, and you will find yourself back onto the path. And even if it means repeating the previous sentence, or where you know that you need to go. And that's where it's really important to not completely memorize a talk, because if you completely memorize it verbatim, then you get lost in the words, you're not sure where you're at, and then you get muddled, then you're not knowing where and how to go forward. So it's knowing with your body and your mind that you will find your path. So pausing is essential, breathing is essential. And I want to ask all of you, are you okay if I put you on my newsletter that is weekly, that you get stories, tips, insights about communication? If you're not already getting it, great. Just want to make sure that would be okay. Any other questions when it comes to the Keynote that I haven't addressed that you would like to know more about? Any last thoughts, Michelle, about your experience in terms of working with me, and overall the Keynote process and the 3-month signature program that you had with me?
I would just say it was amazing. I mean, Tina got me my analysis paralysis, and led me down a path that I feel like I can use. I had done presentations in the past, I had done workshops in the past, but I just couldn't figure out how to make that transition. And I'm still not sure I'm there. So don't be discouraged. I mean, this is not magic. It doesn't go from, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, to perfect in 1 week. Life isn't like that. But I feel like I've made progress. I learned a lot. I just encourage you to keep trying and pushing yourself, and with little things that are outside of your comfort zone, because that's how we all grow, and we don't want to stop growing.
What a great point, Michelle. I actually heard from a gal that I connected with from Toronto this morning. There are 3 levels of goals. And so I love to make goals for my business, for myself, for speaking. And I recommend all of you do the same. Goal number 1, a type of goal, is ones you've done before that you could do again. Those are the lowest risk and the easiest. The growth doesn't happen as much at the A level. The B level is just a little bit pushing you just a little bit out of your comfort zone. But I would recommend at least hitting a C goal every now and again, which is completely new, completely uncertain, and trying something different, where it might almost make you puke a little, because it's like, I'm excited, but I'm freaking out. And those are the ones that really stretch you and help you grow. And so it's something to think about, whether it is you're not sure you have a keynote inside of you, or a TEDx talk, but you want to maybe think about, what is the goal that I have in my communication style to be that authentic speaker that I am, and how can I get there?
Tina,
Any other
one more question?
Yeah.
Any specific TEDx's that we should look at as good?
Any good TEDx's? Well,
Yeah,
I would say that Amy Cuddy has a great TEDx about nonverbal communication. Any of Brene Brown's TEDx talks are fantastic and have a lot of views, mainly because she, A, is a very natural speaker, B, she puts herself out there and she's vulnerable, and C, her content is just rich and helpful and interesting about shame and vulnerability. And I feel that's a good reminder for all of us as speakers to not feel shameful, but be open to vulnerability. Sir Ken Robinson, his is one of the biggest views of all time about schools, killing creativity in schools. He's just a funny dude. So if you want to see something funny and see how humor can be embedded in a TED Talk. I could give you lots of examples, and even I think of the author about creativity, and I'm blanking on, but she does amazing work too. She wrote Eat, Pray, Love. She
Elizabeth
has.
Gilbert.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. She has some great TED Talks too. Elvira, I saw you had a question.
Yeah, my question was for Michelle, actually.
Okay,
about
great.
what has surprised you the most in a good way now that you've gone through this 12-week process with Tina? Like, what surprised you about yourself?
About me.
Yeah.
The most surprising thing about me was I didn't realize I lived in the weeds and I like data as much as I do. Tina kind of said to me, Michelle, there's just too much data on those slides. And she was completely right. It was a very legitimate and helpful thing for me to say. But, you know, I live in that amounts of data. I mean, I said to Tina, oh, I'm going to get 7,000 data points next week, thinking that's the coolest thing ever, to be dropped with 1,000 data points on sodium. So, you know, I mean, I learned that I live in the weeds and I got to get out of there. I got to stop doing it. And it definitely took, you know, there were some crisis phone calls to my girlfriend who was like, what's wrong? And I'm like, I'm not okay. And she was like, you're fine. But no, everybody was really supportive. And so, you know, I did have to get out of the weeds.
Well, and with that, we are out of time. I'd be happy to answer other questions. I do appreciate